So with all the talk in the AFL about draft and trades and free agency starting to ramp up, I wanted to talk about two players, one from Carlton, one from Collingwood, one of whom has chatted with the Essendon coach. The other one has no link to Essendon but might be gettable. I wanted to talk about them in this video.
No one doubts the courage of the boys from Windy Hill. They may try to break our spirits. They may try to get the best of the Bomber boys.
If you like this channel, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. About 60% of you watching haven't subscribed. I'd really appreciate it. So the first bit of interesting news that we're going to talk about revolving around the Bombers is that Brad Scott has met with Jack Silvagni from Carlton. Now this is interesting because Silvagni has been linked with a potential move to Collingwood. Craig McRae, the Collingwood coach, has admitted that he has talked to Jack Silvagni, or at least talked to his management. I think he's talked to Silvagni personally, and Collingwood are interested in picking him up. Well, Brad Scott has talked to Silvagni. It's been, he hasn't actually admitted that himself, but it's been confirmed that they did actually meet. Essendon sort of gave a no comment on it. And what kind of a move would this be for Essendon? Well, the first thing to consider with this is that Silvagni's an unrestricted free agent, which means he can move if he chooses to. There is no restrictions on his movement. If he were to go to Essendon and we were to lose Draper, that actually affects our compensation as well. We would not get pick 5 because the compensation is actually, they calculate it by the net impact of gains and losses through free agency. So if you lose Draper but gain Silvagni, they would look at the difference between the two and the difference in the size of contracts and things like that, and they would work out a compensation that takes into account that you've lost one and gained another. All right, so instead of a first round pick, it might be a second round pick that you get for losing Draper because you've got Silvagni in there as well. And obviously, you wouldn't get pick 5 in that instance, but you get Jack Silvagni. That's the things you got to weigh up in this. So what kind of a fit would he be for Essendon? Because obviously they're considering it. Brad Scott wouldn't have met with him unless he's a player that they would have considered in the team. Well, he's a versatile player. He's kicked 89 goals in his career. He has spent various time playing forward for the Blues, even though he's known more as a defender. He's 27 years old. He's currently out with a groin injury, so that suits the Bombers just fine, of course, because of course you're going to look at players who are currently injured. But look, that aside, I'm not an expert in physiology, so I'll just leave that aside for the time being. But this year he averages 10.7 kicks per game, 3.1 handballs, 13.8 disposals, 5.8 marks, 2.3 tackles. But the thing that interests me the most, and what is probably something that Brad Scott is looking at, is that he ranks 26th in the competition for intercepts at 6 per game, which is more than any current Essendon player. And that's second only in Carlton's side to Jacob Wiedering, who's obviously their best defender. So he's a pretty good player. He's an experienced player, and he has that versatility as well. He's able to go forward. So at his age, 27, what would his role be with Essendon? I mean, if you look at our key defenders at the moment, and imagine we didn't have any injuries, take Jaden Laverty out because he will get delisted, I would imagine, at the end of the season. You're left with Jordan Ridley, Zach Reed and Ben Mackay. And very rarely do we have all three of those on the park at the same time. So someone like Jack Silvagni, who is capable of playing as a tall, but he can also play as a medium-sized defender as well, would probably fit in if one of those wasn't there. I mean, I guess he could also fit into a back six even with those players there. And he's got that versatility to move forward as well. And that versatility is something that Essendon is after. That's something I think that is an invaluable trait in players that we should be looking at, is can they play in other positions? And he can play in those positions. And I've also been very, very opinionated, I guess you could say, on the fact that intercept possessions and getting the ball off the opposition and being able to score from intercepts and being able to stop the opposition getting intercepts from you is the key above everything else to winning football games. It is the one. About 65% of all score sources come from intercepts, Only 35% come from stoppages or kick-ins, which are the only other two ways of scoring. And if you can get intercepts, then it's like you've got an extra player on your team. Right? If you give the ball to the opposition, it's like you're playing for the opposition. So if you can get a good player that's capable of intercepting the ball, that is the type of player that we might be after. Now, look, he's not a superstar. He's not going to change our team or anything like that. He's not going to be the difference between, you'd think, winning extra games or anything like that. But is he an AFL standard player in the prime of his career that has versatility and could fit into the team? Yes, he is. Is he better than someone like a Jordan Ridley? No, he's not. He's probably better than a Ben Mackay, though, I would say, if I was to make a call on that. So, look, it's interesting that Brad Scott has met with him, and, where is he going to be interested in going? I mean, if you were him and you were looking at a club, there's Collingwood, who are, right at the top of the ladder, but they have the oldest team in the AFL, and you would think that in the next couple of years, without some young players coming through for them, they could fall off a cliff. We've been wrong about these things before, but look, that's, a pretty, reasonable thing to say given Collingwood's age profile. Essendon, obviously, we're a much younger side, trying to build something. I don't know. So I think that's one to watch. Jack Silvagni, Brad Scott having talked to him, a potential recruit through free agency for the Bombers. The other player I wanted to look at, and I'll just qualify this by saying that this player has not been linked with Essendon, but he's been linked with a move away from Collingwood, and that's Beau McCreery. So if there is a link or there's rumours about a player potentially moving, then obviously every club, Essendon you'd look at that and you'd consider every player, and if they're able to be got in a trade. And I think this is an interesting one because he's contracted until 2027, and Gold Coast are interested in him. Gold Coast are looking for a player, still a small forward, to replace Isaac Rankine. Obviously, he left him a couple of years ago to go to Adelaide. There's a little bit of talk of, now look, you can take this for what you want, but there's sort of rumours of a little bit of unrest amongst some Magpie players and people at the club in terms of the state of their list build, where they're going to be headed in the next couple of years, that sort of thing. McCreery's 24 years old, as I said, contracted until 2027. But one thing about him, he's a really, really tough, hard-working small forward. And that's what we need. And if you just have a look at Essendon with our small forwards, there's doubt as to whether Guelphy will be on the list next year. He may be, he may not, but he's certainly not certain. There's doubt about Oscar Smart. Certainly I don't think that Smart and Guelphy will be on the list next year. And sort of that leaves Kako down there, of course, and potentially a very, very young and raw Hussein Al-Achkar, who will join us through the NGA Academy, and we'll probably pick him up in the draft, perhaps in the second round, or we'll see. So really, McCreery, whilst he's not a massive goal kicker, he averages about half a goal a game, which is, better than nothing. What I like about him is that he's 13th for tackles inside 50. Now, there's 651 players in the AFL. So if you're 13th for tackles inside 50, that is a pretty good effort. A few years ago, he came third in that category. So he's just about elite in that category. He's really a bit of a nightmare for defenders in some respects who, because he hunts with that intense pressure. He's only 24 years old. I think he's a big game player as well, from what I've observed. He averages 10.5 disposals a game, 2 marks, half a goal, but 4.3 tackles. So I like someone like that in the forward line with their pressure. Now, Collingwood will say he's not moving, and look, he probably won't. Like, why would you leave a great club like Collingwood? But look, Jamie Elliott wants to go. Obviously, he's out of contract, slightly different situation. And, players might want to go, especially for opportunities elsewhere. You just don't know unless you ask. So this is something that I think we should at least monitor and be aware of. Because with his age profile, 24 years old, and his tackling pressure in the forward line, and also coming from a successful organisation in Collingwood, that is definitely the type of player that you could get for. You'd have to give up a little bit, but you wouldn't have to give up that much. Like he's a good player, but he's not a great player, but he's a very good player. Collingwood would not want to lose him, but he's a good player that would fill a role for us down there. I mean, Hussein Al-Achkar won't be able to. He's 18. He's not going to be he'll probably play most of next year in the reserves, you would imagine. I mean, Kako does need a little bit of help down there, and I like the idea of two buzzing small forwards, who can really, really put pressure on opposition defenders. I just like that idea. So I think this is something to consider. And that's why I wanted to bring him up, even though he's not officially linked with Essendon. But look, if he's talked about as a player that may be on the move or may request a trade, or at least is aware of offers from other clubs, then you should at least be considering it. And not a lot of people have talked about this player. That's why I wanted to talk about him and Silvagni, because we hear about the same players all the time. We hear about, Starcevic and from Brisbane, and we hear about Harley Reid and all this, and that's fine, and that's all exciting and everything. But as we get closer to the end of the year, there will be other players who are perhaps more realistic. Harley Reid is probably going to sign a contract with West Coast, so all the rumours say. And I sort of hope he does in a way, because it just takes that option off the table and it just makes it more realistic to go after other players. And I think someone like McCreery would actually be a good fit if he was gettable. I don't know whether he is, but we'll see. So what do you guys think? I just thought I'd talk about these two players, one from Carlton, one from Collingwood, because not a lot of people have been talking about them in terms of their links to Essendon, and I thought it would be interesting to see what their roles would be and whether you think either of them or both would actually be good fits at Essendon next year. So I'll leave that open in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going to leave it there. Hope you have a great day, everybody. Like and subscribe to this channel. And as always, go Bombers.